Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of smoke, scrolls, and mildly combustible curiosity. Imagine it. You're standing in the center of a dim, candle-lit room, the walls lined with bamboo shelves drooping under the weight of ancient texts. There's a steady, syrupy drip coming from a bronze vessel, something gurgling ominously in a pot to your left, and the faintest trace of sulfur tickling your nose. The alchemist, hunched in a corner and mumbling to himself, doesn't look up as you enter. He's too busy grinding something sparkly, possibly toxic, into a fine powder with a jade pestle. The whole place smells like damp parchment and bad ideas. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough to reach for the comments, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly across the creaky wooden floor, and your foot knocks against a gourd filled with crushed cinnabar. The powder floats up, shimmering red in the lantern light. You sneeze quietly, hoping the alchemist didn't hear. He did, but he only gives a brief knowing glance before returning to his scroll. A recipe written in flowing calligraphy that includes things like tiger bone and cloud heart. Whether those are metaphors or someone's grocery list is unclear. In ancient China, alchemy wasn't some fringe hobby. It was a spiritual pursuit wrapped in cosmic theory, and just a dash of wishful thinking. These weren't your modern white lab coat types. These folks were part philosopher, part pharmacist, part arsonist. Their goals, modest. Stuff like immortality, turning rocks into gold, and achieving harmony with the universe through smoke-based experiments. The practice took shape during the Han Dynasty, around 200 BCE, when Taoist ideas began blending with mineral medicine and early chemistry. It wasn't just about mixing stuff together. It was about tapping into the key of the cosmos, coaxing life from metal, and convincing time itself to take a nap. To be fair, you've tried similar things with caffeine and naps on Mondays. You glance around the room again. There's a cracked vessel labeled with the character for longevity, though based on its charred bottom, it's seen some things. A faded wall painting shows a stork flying above mountains, a Taoist symbol of immortality, or possibly a warning about inhaling mercury vapor. A typical Chinese alchemist might spend years collecting ingredients. Dragon bones, which were actually fossilized animal remains, mica, lead, sulfur, and realgar. You'd recognize some of these as absolutely don't eat that. But for the ancient experimenter, they were keys to unlocking heavenly realms. Historians still argue whether alchemists believed their elixirs had to be consumed, or whether the ritual itself was the point. But judging by the number of emperors who drank glowing liquids and then promptly stopped breathing, we'll go ahead and assume ingestion was enthusiastically encouraged. You step carefully around a low work table covered in brittle paper. One document catches your eye. It's a formula involving bat guano, river pearl, and 9 rotations of breath. No measurements, no instructions, just a vague implication that if you chant right and swirl clockwise, you might achieve immortality, or just get dizzy and set your sleeve on fire. It wasn't all hocus pocus. Some alchemists kept meticulous records, observing how materials changed under heat, pressure, or a good old divine thunderstorm. They noticed chemical reactions long before chemistry had a name. And sure, most of their notebooks ended in scorched edges, but you've also burned toast in a non-explosive kitchen, so no judgment. The odd thing is, there were some real insights buried in the ash. Techniques like distillation and alloy, production advanced thanks to these ancient tinkerers. Even porcelain, a technological marvel of the ancient world, benefited from knowledge shared by alchemists fiddling with minerals and high heat. And yet every few pages of scroll notes seem to end with something like, resulted in unfortunate noise and roof damage. Your alchemist host has now started fanning his crucible with a chicken feather. Whether this cools it or simply makes the experiment feel fancy is unclear. The potion inside burps. You step back. As the room fills with the scent of pine resin and what might be Fermented lizard tail, don't ask. Your mind drifts. What drives a person to spend their life heating strange powders in pursuit of eternal youth? Some say it was devotion. Others say delusion. One theory? A royal paycheck. Court alchemists were often hired by emperors desperate to avoid death. That's some serious pressure. Deliver a potion of immortality, or risk being replaced, or worse, kept on staff after your failures, which might be a slower punishment. The walls rattle briefly as a jar clinks on the edge of a shelf. You reach out to catch it, don't, it's probably unstable. You settle into a stool and listen to the gentle bubbling, the fire crackling beneath the bellows, and the occasional philosophical sigh from the alchemist. He mutters something about yin and yang needing better communication. You nod solemnly as though you understood. One last glance around the room reveals the telltale signs of previous experiments on a scorched wall, a suspicious hole in the ceiling, and a very nervous-looking cat. If you've learned anything tonight, it's that the path to eternal life was paved with well-meaning explosions, and we're just getting started. You haven't moved from your rickety stool, mostly because you're pretty sure the floorboards next to you are holding a grudge against gravity. The alchemist's workshop continues its quiet performance, every flask, scroll, and dust-furred container playing its role in this ancient chemistry of hope and hazard. You watch as your host gently ladles something shimmering into a wide, blackened bowl. It sizzles. Of course it does. This moment, as chaotic as it feels, is strangely typical. Ancient Chinese alchemists didn't just work in grand, palace-endorsed labs. They practiced in back rooms, monasteries, mountainside huts, even under makeshift tents. Their tools were often handmade, earthen crucibles, bamboo tubes, bellows fashioned from animal skin. Many of them resembled cooking implements, which is probably why so many mishaps involved mistaking elixir for dinner and vice versa. You shift a bit and recall how it all started with the lofty ideal of achieving Xian, or transcendent immortality. Taoist philosophy believed in harmonizing with the cosmos, in achieving a state beyond suffering and decay. Naturally, someone decided the best way to achieve that was to boil mercury and drink it. You know, like you do. At the heart of this earnest madness was alchemy's golden triangle: longevity, purity, and transformation. Many believed that if a substance could survive fire unchanged, like gold, it must be spiritually perfect. So turning base metals into gold wasn't just for wealth, it was symbolic of spiritual ascension. But as it turns out, turning rocks into gold is just slightly harder than making your toddler eat broccoli. The ingredients they used weren't random, though they may seem that way from your cozy perch in the 21st century. Minerals were chosen based on their color, origin, texture, and crucially, their correspondence with elements of Taoist cosmology: fire, water, wood, metal, and earth. The idea was to balance yin and yang, not just philosophically but chemically. It's like trying to make emotional peace by reorganizing your spice rack. Some elixirs were even color-coded. Gold-colored concoctions were thought to prolong life. Silver ones promoted clarity. Red might awaken inner fire. And black? Well, nobody seems to agree on what the black ones did, but they often required ingredients, like scorched batwing and moss scraped from temple roofs. So let's assume spiritual indigestion was involved. Historians still argue whether these recipes were meant to be metaphorical. Maybe drinking the elixirs wasn't required. Maybe the ritual was what mattered. But then again, records show many high-ranking officials, and even emperors, eagerly gulping down potions containing powdered jade, realgar, a toxic arsenic compound, and yes, plenty of mercury. Your alchemist shifts his weight and begins stirring with a stick that looks suspiciously like it used to be a flute. The room fills with a low metallic tang that hugs the back of your throat. He adds pine resin, muttering about immortal breath, then casually tosses in a pinch of yellow powder that hisses as it dissolves. You resist the urge to duck. These experiments weren't carried out recklessly. There was ceremony, chants, carefully selected times of day, and planetary alignments. Alchemists believe success required cosmic cooperation, which is poetic, until you realize that if Saturn was in a bad mood, your entire workshop might go airborne. Some procedures took weeks long, smoldering sessions of slow cooking ingredients in sealed retorts, all while reciting verses and avoiding drafts. One recipe called for heating a mercury sulfur paste inside a clay pot sealed with ox dung, then burying it in hot sand for 100 days. That's either a mystical preparation or a particularly intense crockpot recipe. Despite the devotion, things went wrong often. Many labs burned down, some vanished altogether, presumed lost to fire, explosion, or a disappointed landlord. Records from the Tang and Song dynasties contain tragicomic notes like house collapse due to elixir pressure or assistant hair missing, presumed ignited. One scroll fragment describes a promising compound that glowed white with moon energy before accidentally melting through the table and setting fire to the rice storeroom. That experiment may have advanced neither science nor lunch, but not all was lost in the smoke. These alchemists were surprisingly observant. They noticed how heat changed the properties of metals. They discovered early distillation methods, sometimes using spiral bamboo tubes cooled with rainwater. The pursuit of immortality accidentally led to advancements in metallurgy, ceramics, and medicinal compounds. There's even debate around whether some of the compounds they handled, like saltpeter and sulfur, may have first hinted at what would later become gunpowder. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, you're watching a man in a soot-stained robe stir something that smells suspiciously, like burning socks and licorice. He sprinkles a few crushed pearls into the bubbling mix, humming under his breath. Some alchemists believed that pearl powder could purify the body and still the soul. Others believed it just made the elixir sparkle. You lean forward, lulled by the rhythmic stirring and the warm glow of the nearby brazier. Then suddenly pop, just a bubble. Nothing exploded. You exhale slowly, realizing you were holding your breath. The alchemist doesn't even flinch. He's probably heard far worse. You settle again, letting your shoulders drop. The smell of sandalwood and something vaguely vinegary wraps around you. You think about how, for all their faults, these ancient scientists were driven by something pure, a deep yearning to outlast time, to heal the body, to understand existence, not through abstract math or cold equations, but by doing, by creating, by risking eyebrows. In a strange way, it's comforting. You drift gently, listening to the fire, imagining a time when the secrets of the universe were stored in tiny clay jars, and occasionally ignited one's curtain rod. The brazier hisses softly, exhaling a spiral of smoke that winds lazily toward the ceiling beams, where spiderwebs glisten like tiny nets strung to catch stray sparks. You shift your gaze toward the center of the room, where the alchemist has now donned a rather theatrical hat, something between a crown and a bird's nest. Whether it enhances focus or simply hides singed hair is unclear. You're just in time to observe the most delicate of routines, the imperial demonstration. In ancient China, alchemists were often summoned to imperial courts. Their task? Convince emperors that they could bottle eternal life, or at the very least, improve energy levels and make the royal complexion glow. The results? Let's just say there were more singed robes than glowing reviews. You peek into your imagination, conjuring the image of a nervous alchemist stepping into a grand, incense-thickened chamber. Bronze mirrors glinting on the walls, silk rustling as ministers shuffle. The emperor, perched on his jade throne, gestures for the show to begin. And there it is, the ceramic tea set, specially commissioned for this demonstration, positioned too close to the fire pit. You already know where this is going. The formula the alchemist prepares is called jindan, the golden elixir. Its recipe changes from century to century, but it always contains some combination of sulfur, mercury lead, and a generous helping of wishful thinking. The belief is that when prepared correctly, jindan shines with golden brilliance and grants eternal youth. Prepared incorrectly, It bubbles, belches smoke, and sometimes launches fragments of expensive porcelain into royal beards. One record from the Tang dynasty tells of an official who presented such an elixir to Emperor Xuanzong. As the mixture heated, a loud crack split the room. One of the cups ruptured, launching hot paste across the floor. A eunuch screamed. The emperor reportedly chuckled. That man kept his job, but only after swearing he meant to demonstrate the volatility of spirit transformation. Historians still argue whether these demonstrations were genuinely believed to work, or whether emperors simply enjoyed the performance. After all, when your title is Son of Heaven, you might be tempted to entertain a few unconventional health fads, and some of them did believe. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the same man who built the terracotta army, was famously obsessed with immortality. He sent expeditions across the seas searching for mythical islands of long life. But he also drank mercury daily. His death, marked by a parade of bizarre rituals and leaking coffin fluids, didn't exactly scream immortal. You imagine a court physician nervously pouring another silvery liquid into a cup, whispering that this batch will definitely work. Probably. Maybe. Unless the lunar cycle is off again. But it wasn't just mercury that found its way into these royal brews. One infamous recipe called for lead calcined with deer horn, turtle shell ash, and honey. The taste was likely memorable. The effects also memorable, but for different reasons. You tilt your head, noticing your own alchemist is now arranging miniature models on a tray, tiny porcelain bottles shaped like peaches, cranes, and dragons. Each symbolizes longevity, wisdom, or transformation. It's charming, until you recall that each one may contain something highly unstable. The ancient court labs, known as pill chambers, were often tucked behind temples or secluded gardens. These weren't cluttered kitchens. They were designed for ritual, experimentation, and the occasional explosive surprise. Think of them as a cross between a spa and a chemistry set for emotionally unavailable deities. Inside, practitioners wore ceremonial robes, burned specific incenses, and sometimes fasted for days before mixing ingredients. It wasn't enough to make a potion. You had to earn it spiritually and physically. Many believed that only a pure soul could produce an effective elixir, which raises the question, how did that soul handle third-degree burns? One scroll fragment from the Song Dynasty describes an emperor so impressed by a shimmering elixir that he immediately appointed the alchemist to a high office, then died 3 months later with skin lesions and a tendency to hum unintentionally. Still, not every outcome was fatal. Some formulas produced gentle tonics believed to soothe digestion, sharpen the mind, or reduce fever. Others may have had mild psychoactive effects, creating visions of immortality, even as your feet stayed planted firmly in the royal garden. Back in your alchemist's den, the man has lit another incense stick. This one smells faintly of mint and moss. He gently fans the air toward a pale green vial, as though inviting it to cooperate. The room glows gold-orange from the fire, the occasional sputter casting long shadows that dance along the cracked walls. It's strangely peaceful, isn't it? There's something undeniably calming about watching someone attempt the impossible with such care. You begin to understand the ancient draw of it all, to grasp at eternity, to cheat time one pinch of powder at a time. But for every imperial tea set that exploded, there were hundreds of quieter moments. Scrolls being copied by moonlight, stones ground into fine dust over weeks, apprentices carrying jugs of mountain spring water with hands so cold they ached. The quiet grind behind the myth. You yawn without realizing it. Your own breath blends with the smoky air. And though your host hasn't said a word, his presence is comforting. He's been doing this for years, decades maybe. He's watched pots bubble, scrolls burn, and still he stirs. He picks up a final jar, delicately etched deep cobalt blue, and uncorks it. A soft poo escapes, and the scent of old lavender and copper rises. He nods slightly, pours 3 drops into the cauldron, and waits. No explosion. Just a low hum like a temple bell far off in the mist. The mixture glows faintly, as if acknowledging all who came before. The emperors, the hopefuls, the charlatans, and the scientists, every smoky breath, every scorched robe, all of them chasing the same dream. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to understand why. The glow from the cauldron softens, taking on a rhythm, a pulsing light, slow and steady, as if the concoction itself is breathing. You find your own breath sinking with it, deep and even. The alchemist, still silent, settles beside the brazier, cross-legged and serene. For a brief moment, the room feels more like a temple than a laboratory. But then he reaches behind him and pulls out a jug labeled with a faded character that can mean either life or bathwater, depending on the brushstroke. You hope it's the former. As he begins to pour the contents into a wide, shallow basin, a metallic sheen unfurls across the surface. Silver, red, almost iridescent. You watch with a curiosity that borders on concern, because in the world of ancient Chinese alchemy, when things start to shimmer, they're either about to become sacred or very, very flammable. One of the most curious and frankly alarming practices in this tradition was the mercury bath. Yes, you heard that right. Bathing in mercury. Not metaphorically. Not spiritually, physically, with skin. Taoist alchemists revered mercury, known as shui yin or liquid silver, as a powerful substance believed to purify the body and prolong life. It flowed like water, but never evaporated, never withered. To them, that seemed like immortality in liquid form. To you, it seems like a dermatological emergency. You imagine standing in a shallow wooden tub filled with gleaming mercury, its heavy liquid rippling slowly as you step in. The sensation would be cool, dense like wading through metallic honey, and also incredibly dangerous. But at the time, many considered it rejuvenating. It symbolized stillness, eternity, lunar essence. Scholars wrote of its calming properties, its ability to absorb chaos. There's at least one account of an emperor commissioning a mercury pool to sit beside his palace garden. He'd meditate near it, inhale its vapors, and occasionally dip his hands in it. All very calming, right up until the tremors and hallucinations kicked in. Historians still argue whether these royal rituals were spiritual cleansing or simply slow, elegant poisonings. Your host uncorks a smaller vessel. Inside is a thick red paste made from cinnabar, the mineral form of mercury sulfide. It's bright and beautiful like powdered rubies. It was a favorite in alchemical circles, ingested, burned, worn as amulets. Unfortunately, it's also, say it with me, extremely toxic. But you can't deny its aesthetic appeal. Even now, as the alchemist smears a streak of it along the rim of the basin, it glows against the firelight like a streak of frozen sunset. You lean closer, not too close, and recall how cinnabar was used not just in elixirs, but also in tomb paintings and ceremonial art. It represented vitality, transformation, and the blood of the earth. A beautiful symbol until it started burning holes in your intestines. There's something deeply paradoxical about these substances. The very things that promised eternal life often shortened it. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe it was about the gesture, the ritual, the striving, a way to assert control in a world full of decay and loss. Or maybe, as one scholar once joked, it was just the world's most elaborate excuse to play with shiny things. You hear a soft clink. The alchemist's cup meets the basin's edge. He dips a ladle into the mixture and pours it carefully into a wide-necked vial. The concoction cools instantly, forming a smooth mirror-like surface. He ties a ribbon around the neck and sets it gently beside dozens of similar bottles, each labeled with cryptic names: Tiger's Dream, Second Moon, Essence of Breath. Some were meant to be sipped once under a waxing moon. Others were stored for years before being opened. A few were never opened at all, buried with their creators to be enjoyed in the afterlife. You wonder how many are still sealed beneath ancient soil, quietly glowing, quietly waiting. Oddly, not all side effects were negative. Historical records describe brief bursts of clarity, visions, sensations of floating. Some believe the mercury awakened hidden channels of the soul, cleared emotional stagnation. But these accounts are filtered through centuries of myth and metaphor. Was it revelation or hallucination? One Tang Dynasty poet, who dabbled in alchemy, wrote verses claiming that after ingesting an elixir made from stoneflower and moon salt, he could hear the laughter of the stars. A lovely thought. Or a mercury-induced fever dream. Scholars continue to debate. Meanwhile, your host reaches for a worn silk pouch and shakes out a handful of what looks like glittering charcoal. He arranges the pieces into a ring around the basin, mutters something melodic, and lights them one by one. The air fills with a strange scent like pine, smoke, and damp stone. You feel yourself exhale without thinking. These ingredients weren't chosen just for their chemical properties. They had stories. Deer antler was believed to carry the strength of the forest. Tortoise shell represented longevity. Even substances like realgar, which could be lethal, were believed to eat evil and shield the spirit. Everything had meaning, even the soot. You're struck by how immersive this practice was. Alchemy wasn't just a set of instructions. It was a sensory event. There was rhythm, texture, aroma, even music. Some alchemists composed chants specifically to be sung while grinding minerals. Others timed their experiments to seasonal festivals or celestial alignments. In a way, every potion was a small performance, a solo opera of hope and hazard. A soft wind rattles the bamboo screen near the doorway. Your alchemist doesn't notice. He's gently rocking the basin now, coaxing the liquid into stillness. Outside, the moon has risen, a round, serene coin in the sky. Inside, the mercury glows faintly, reflecting that lunar face with eerie precision. It's in this moment that you begin to feel it. The allure, the danger, the fragile beauty of it all. These ancient seekers weren't just chasing life, they were chasing meaning, trying to turn impermanence into poetry, failure into ritual, flame into eternity. And sometimes, it even worked. Briefly, magically, then exploded. But in between the bangs and burns, there were these moments, quiet, golden, suspended like mercury in a bowl of bronze light. And now you're drifting with them. The coals near the brazier have dimmed now, glowing low and orange like embers in a dragon's dream. Your alchemist host takes a long breath through his nose, eyes half-lidded, the way one might savor a sunrise or the exact moment before a kettle sings. Then, without ceremony, he reaches under the table and retrieves a small lacquered box, fastened shut with a slip of silk thread. You recognize that expression on his face, the mix of reverence and barely contained curiosity. This is not for boiling or burning. This is for drinking. And you, dear listener, are about to witness something simultaneously ambitious and deeply inadvisable, the sampling of an ancient Chinese immortality elixir. Now, before you raise your eyebrows or reach for your modern medical handbook, consider this: back in the Han and Tang dynasties, ingesting strange metallic concoctions wasn't fringe behavior. It was mainstream science. The court endorsed it. Scholars celebrated it. People spent entire fortunes acquiring recipes that sounded more like forbidden cocktails than medicinal tonics. You can almost picture the recipe titles. Crimson Dragon Pearl Elixir, best taken at dawn. Elixir of Infinite Breath may cause light tingling. Cloud-eating pill, store in shadow, avoid the unworthy. The box creaks open and inside, nestled in a bed of dried lotus petals, rests a jade vial. Not labeled, not explained. But the way your host holds it, hand steady, breath even, you know it's something special, or dangerous, or both. Many of these elixirs contained ingredients modern toxicologists would strongly advise against. Cinnabar, as we mentioned, was a favorite. So was realgar, a vivid orange arsenic sulfide, often used to expel demons and, unfortunately, internal organs. Other common components included calcined gold, powdered mica, lead oxide, and something cryptically labeled as essence of tortoise shell smoked under heaven. Historians still argue whether these potions were meant for frequent sipping, ritual use, or to be gulped down with the same kind of optimism that fuels extreme sports. But here's the kicker. People genuinely believed they worked. Some reported increased energy, clearer dreams, luminous skin. Even more curious, there are records of people, particularly hermits and Taoist monks, who lived exceptionally long lives while engaging with alchemical traditions. Did they actually consume these brews or just perform the rituals? The scrolls don't always say. And the ones who knew, well, they're either dead or floating around in some celestial bureaucracy we haven't cracked yet. Your alchemist uncorks the vial with a soft pop. A faint vapor rises, lavender, iron, and something sweet but metallic, like overripe pears mixed with forgotten coins. He pours the thinnest line into a shallow cup, lifts it, and pauses. You both listen. In the distance, a night bird calls. Somewhere beyond the lab, water trickles from a bamboo pipe. And beneath it all, that low, ever-present crackle of embers, as if the world itself is brewing something just out of sight.
He drinks.
No fireworks. No glowing. Just a quiet nod, a sigh, and a slight lift of one eyebrow. Then he carefully replaces the vial, tucks it back into the box, and reties the silk thread. You sense he's done this before dozens of times, yet each time feels new. Maybe the ritual is the medicine. You glance toward the shelves now, lined with small ceramic jars and bamboo canisters. Each contains a different mixture, labeled in careful brushstrokes. Wind blood, sunsmoke, refined jade dust. Some are sealed with wax, others tied with string. A few you notice have faint scorch marks near their lids. And yes, people actually sold these. The ancient Chinese world had a thriving market for elixirs and longevity products. Wealthy patrons hired private alchemists to concoct custom formulas. There were traveling potion vendors, temple-based pharmacists, even black market dealers selling authentic droplets of phoenix sweat. You could probably find a tincture to cure anything, from headaches to heartbreak to poor poetry. Of course, the results were mixed. One nobleman reportedly developed glowing fingernails after 2 weeks on a lead-based tonic. Another began speaking with the moon after sampling a mercury blend. He was later found whispering to a bronze mirror. One princess, famously fond of golden elixirs, developed what modern scientists now suspect was arsenic-induced euphoria, followed by arsenic-induced not being alive. Still, the allure remained. Because these elixirs promised more than health, they promised transformation. Taoist alchemy wasn't just about extending life. It was about transcending it, becoming one with the cosmos, moving beyond flesh, hunger, fear. There were even tales of successful ascensions, monks who took a final dose and vanished into clouds, leaving behind only sandals and a faint shimmer on the rocks. Did these stories have literal truth? Or were they metaphors for enlightenment? Scholars continue to scratch their heads, while you quietly sip your sleepy tea and thank the stars for modern pharmacy labels. Your alchemist, now sitting peacefully with eyes closed, looks less like a mad scientist and more like a monk deep in meditation. The air has shifted, less sharp, more floral. You realize he's lit another stick of incense, this one threaded with powdered camphor and crushed chrysanthemum. It smells like memory. You drift toward the wall of scrolls. One in particular catches your eye. It's old, brittle, with a faded red seal in the title, Elixir Record of the 10,000-Fold Spirit. Inside, the formulas are handwritten, detailed, and weirdly poetic. Grind the bone of winter wind. Mix with morning dew that has not seen sunlight. Add 3 sighs of a blackbird. Stir until the moon turns her face. Clearly, science and poetry weren't mutually exclusive. You imagine the scribe writing these lines by lantern light, pausing occasionally to sip from a questionable brew and wonder if immortality would also cure his back pain. Outside, the night deepens. The fire crackles one last time before settling into a glow. And in that warmth, in that silence, you feel something shift. Not your molecules, not your lifespan, but your understanding. These alchemists weren't just trying to live forever. They were trying to find meaning. In herbs, in flame, in ritual, in the act of trying. And in that effort, strange, smoky, explosive though it may be, there's a kind of peace. The room is quieter now. Even the fire, once playful and crackling, has curled into a hush of glowing coals, content to nap beside its own ashes. The alchemist sits motionless. The jade vial replaced, the incense nearly gone, its final tendrils trailing upward like sleepy silk ribbons. You think this might be a good time to leave him to his meditations, until you hear a thud followed by a muffled curse. Apparently someone forgot about the grain storage room. You follow the sound through a narrow corridor lit by flickering oil lamps. The walls here are less ornate, more utilitarian. A few chipped bowls, a shovel leaning suspiciously near a bundle of fireworks, and one unlucky jar of sesame paste turned upside down in a corner. There's a door at the end, just slightly ajar, with the unmistakable smell of something scorched drifting out. You brace yourself, and there it is, a scene that ancient Chinese farmers and alchemists alike dreaded. A room meant for storing rice, beans, and preserved root vegetables, now suspiciously smoky, with a small crater smoldering near the center. Yes, it happened again. This wasn't uncommon. Alchemy, in all its glory and spiritual optimism, had one recurring enemy: infrastructure. Fire doesn't care about your philosophy. And elixirs, when mishandled or mixed with the wrong damp broom or mischievous apprentice, tended to go boom. You step carefully across the charred floorboards, noticing an overturned pot labeled black sulfur paste. Do not ignite. Too late. A few stalks of burnt barley lean tragically in the corner, and one rat, miraculously alive, sits blinking in the light, probably reevaluating its career path. Historically, grain explosions caused more than just hunger pangs. During the Song Dynasty, records detail a temple-turned-laboratory, where an alchemist's fire ate the storehouse, startled the oxen, and woke 5 counties. That's not an exaggeration. Early alchemical experiments often took place near storage areas simply because they had the space, and because monks or household servants could sneak ingredients in from multiple sources, which led to frequent and often hilarious property damage. One official report from the 10th century describes an elixir of wind circulation that, when ignited accidentally, tore off the lab's roof and scattered fermented radishes across a neighboring shrine. The result? A faint spiritual aroma, and a very confused goose. You crouch near the crater and spot flecks of red and yellow crystal, remnants of a failed mix, possibly sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal, which, yes, you may recognize as the basic components of gunpowder. Historians still argue whether gunpowder was discovered by accident or by ambition. What's agreed upon is this: sometime in the 9th century, Chinese alchemists pursuing immortality stumbled upon the very thing that would transform global warfare forever. One text, the Zhen Yuan Miao Dao Yao Lui, a sort of alchemical cheat sheet, warns that combining certain substances could result in blinding smoke and flying sparks that set beards aflame. And from there, well, you've seen fireworks. You can guess the rest. It's wild to think the same people, brewing gold from clay, also invented something that would become artillery. One monk may have been trying to ascend to heaven. Instead, he invented the rocket. And yet, for all the destructive potential, early gunpowder wasn't used as a weapon right away. Instead, it was stuffed into bamboo tubes and set off during festivals, to scare away evil spirits, to entertain crowds, and to celebrate new emperors. A blast of smoke was seen as purification, a kind of spiritual house cleaning via controlled chaos. Eventually, the military took note. But that's for another time. Right now, you're examining the floorboards for scorch marks and noticing a peculiar pattern, tiny black spots in a perfect circle, a failed containment ring perhaps, or a ritual boundary gone slightly sideways. You sit back on your heels imagining what led to this latest incident. Perhaps an apprentice misread a scroll, or the humidity warped the storage jars, or maybe, just maybe, the rice spirits were tired of being ignored. The alchemists were always balancing on a knife's edge, between spiritual discipline and chemical volatility. They practiced fasting, breath control, and meditation, but they also handled ingredients that could ignite from a warm breeze. It was like baking a souffle on a volcano while reciting poetry backwards. Quietly noble and undeniably risky. You hear movement behind you, just the soft shuffle of robes. The alchemist appears in the doorway unbothered, holding a long-handled brush and a bucket of sand. You step aside as he begins calmly sweeping ash into neat piles, like someone tidying after a particularly energetic tea ceremony. No drama, no panic, just acceptance. Because here's the truth, they expected failure. Most ancient alchemists knew they wouldn't live forever. They understood the risks, the likelihood of explosions, the trail of cracked pots behind them. But still they chased it, not because they thought they'd succeed, but because something in them needed to try. And there's something beautiful about that. You help sweep in silence, the scent of burnt rice and pine resin curling around your sleeves. Outside, a breeze stirs the bamboo. Somewhere a bell chimes softly. Another night, another failed batch, another lesson scorched into the wood. But the scrolls remain. The experiments continue. And tomorrow the cauldron will be relit. After all, as one alchemist reportedly said after blowing out a temple wall, well, that's one way to find the limit. You return to the main chamber, brushing soot from your sleeves as the door to the grain room clicks shut behind you. The alchemist, unshaken by the recent mini-crater, is already back at work. He hums softly a tune that might be devotional or just an ode to, I'm still alive, and so is most of my ceiling. His hands are steady as he arranges a new row of ingredients across the workbench. This next phase, you quickly sense, isn't about function.
It's about form.
Because what he's about to attempt isn't a potion or a pill, but something more ephemeral, something closer to art or illusion. You've entered the era of the phoenix made of smoke. In ancient Chinese alchemical practice, not all experiments aimed to be drunk, swallowed, or rubbed on one's knees. Some were meant to be seen. These visual transformations, blazing colors, sudden flames, floating vapors, were symbolic performances, dramatic metaphors for spiritual rebirth. You sit quietly on a low cushion as the alchemist picks up a piece of dried bamboo. It's been hollowed out, polished, its ends sealed with wax. He holds it up to the light, examining the contents through the slats. Then he begins packing it with layers: powdered mica, bits of camphor bark, dried magnolia petals, a pinch of saltpeter, and something from a pouch marked red wind. That's probably fine. Historians still debate whether these ritual bursts were deliberate precursors to fireworks or happy accidents that got folded into temple festivals. But by the 10th century, references appear to sacred tubes that, when ignited during meditation, released columns of smoke in spiral forms, often described as phoenixes, dragons, or celestial beasts. Of course, what people saw in those shapes may have depended on how much mercury they'd recently inhaled. Your alchemist places the tube in a bronze holder shaped like a lotus flower. He steps back, closes his eyes, and lights a long reed match. As he touches the flame to the fuse, he doesn't flinch. You, however, instinctively lean sideways, behind a small stack of ceramic tiles labeled "Do Not Stack." The tube ignites not with a bang but with a sigh. Smoke pours out in shimmering waves, tinted pink and gold curling upward into the rafters. The shapes aren't clear exactly, but there's a rhythm to the spirals, something elegant. You think of wings or petals or a dream melting into the ceiling. It's beautiful, brief, then gone. The ash falls in a neat pile. The alchemist bows slightly, as if to the memory of whatever creature just swam through his laboratory air. It wasn't just spectacle. These events, these temporary, explosive creations, reflected a deeper truth within Taoist philosophy, that transformation was sacred, even if fleeting. Alchemists believed that fire could reveal the hidden essence of a substance. Just as the phoenix is reborn through flame, so too might the soul evolve through exposure, combustion, and renewal. One particularly poetic alchemical text describes how a pill of transformation must be tested by fire. If it flies, the spirit is true. If it melts, the self is weak. If it explodes, then heaven speaks clearly. You raise an eyebrow at that last part. Not all demonstrations were so graceful. Some alchemists attempted complex vapor sculptures, by boiling elixirs in thin-necked flasks to produce specific smoke trails. One record recounts a Taoist master who insisted he could conjure the 8 immortals in vapor form. He ended up recreating something closer to 8 confused chickens. The audience still clapped, possibly out of relief. There were even reports of walking incense, sticks infused with ingredients that caused them to wobble slightly on their own as they burned. Whether this was a clever trick of balance or just uneven, flooring remains a subject of deeply unhurried, scholarly debate. Your host picks up another bamboo stick, this one thinner, bound with a red thread. He lights it and waves it in a circular pattern. The trail it leaves glows faintly, and for a moment, you smell something oddly nostalgic. Dried oranges, fresh parchment, memory itself. It's easy to forget, in all this smoke and superstition, that alchemy was also deeply personal. These rituals weren't just grand experiments. They were expressions of longing. To be more, to live longer, to burn away weakness and become radiant. Sometimes that took the shape of a potion. Sometimes it looked like a phoenix dancing for 6 seconds, before dissolving into ash. You glance around and notice the scrolls again, many now gently curling at the edges, aged and ambered. One of them, slightly unfurled, shows a painted sequence, a bottle, then a flame, then a stylized bird ascending. Beside it is a line of brush calligraphy that roughly translates to, "He who tends the flame becomes its shape." The alchemist doesn't speak, but his movements carry the message. Every pinch of powder, every breath fanned toward a cooling crucible, it's part of the same ritual. He isn't just making mixtures, he's becoming them. The fire dims again. A final ember pops like punctuation. You realize something else. These alchemists weren't necessarily obsessed with eternity. Some were, yes, but many simply wanted to transform, to shift, to become better, wiser, more whole. They used minerals and metals the way others use music or prayer, not because it always worked, but because the process itself felt like hope. You lean back, inhaling the faintest trace of burnt orange peel and myrrh, your eyes tracing the last curls of smoke overhead. Somewhere in that fragrant haze, a phoenix made of pink vapor still flaps its wings, and whether it's real or not doesn't really matter anymore. The smoke has long since cleared, but its ghost lingers in the rafters, etched into the scent of the room like yesterday's thoughts. You find yourself yawning, not from boredom but from the slow, gentle rhythm of a night spent surrounded by quiet magic, filtered through burnt herbs and faded scrolls. The alchemist is still at work, now consulting an astrological chart drawn on rice paper the color of old teeth. He furrows his brow, glancing between the parchment and the contents of a bowl shaped like a turtle shell. He's about to mix again, but only if the stars give permission. Welcome to the age-old dance between alchemy and astrology, two ancient sciences that got along like fire and fireworks. You think modern scientists stress over lab variables? Try calculating planetary favorability with a rooster crowing and your assistant whispering that Saturn just entered the wrong mansion. In Chinese alchemy, timing was everything. Ingredients didn't just need to be the right combination. They needed to be gathered at the right hour, under the right sky, sometimes even under the right wind. A tonic made at noon might be inert. The same tonic made during a full moon with the Big Dipper pointing east? Possibly divine, or at least sparkly. You watch your alchemist trace lines with his brush, a zigzag through stars, representing the white tiger of the west, a dotted path through the vermilion bird of the south. These weren't just pretty symbols. They were part of the 4 celestial guardians, used to align ingredients with cosmic forces. The logic? If the universe is a giant pot of qi, you'd better stir it with the right ladle. Historians still argue whether these charts were accurate celestial records or spiritual metaphors. But what's clear is that no serious alchemist ever mixed an elixir without first consulting the sky, or at least pretending to. Even skeptics would bow east before heating a crucible. Just in case, you inch closer, peeking over the alchemist's shoulder. The chart now glows faintly from a nearby oil lamp. It's dense with symbols, dragons twined around dots, arrows labeled with elemental cycles. and what you hope isn't a diagram for summoning a talking gourd. Each dot, each curve has meaning. The moon in a water sign might dampen a fire-based elixir. Mars overhead could embolden a tonic, but also increase the odds of spontaneous combustion. Venus, bless her, was said to be favorable for sweetening the breath of potions, and occasionally the breath of the drinker. Your host taps one symbol twice, mutters a word that sounds like "not today," and sets aside the turtle bowl. Apparently, Mercury is in a bad mood. Instead, he retrieves a different set of ingredients from a lacquered box labeled lunar compliant. Inside, a small pouch of green powder, a sprig of dried orchid, and a pinch of gold flakes. It's gentler fare, nothing likely to explode probably. You realize then that alchemy wasn't just a science or a philosophy. It was a calendar. A lifestyle of watching the moon rise, waiting for eclipses, celebrating equinoxes with carefully timed infusions. One scroll from the Tang dynasty recommends that pills of quiet thunder be started exactly 3 breaths after the rooster's second cry on the 7th day of spring. You picture an apprentice standing outside in the cold, clutching a mortar and pestle, counting roosters. The determination, the quiet dread, the possibility of confusing the second cry with the third. It's a miracle they ever finished a batch. But here's the twist. Many Taoist alchemists enjoyed this unpredictability. The variables weren't obstacles, they were partners. The universe wasn't some inert machine. It was alive, swirling with intentions, moods, and cosmic flavor. The alchemist wasn't just a mixer of substances. They were a listener, a reader of rhythms, a humble participant in something grander. Some formulas required burning incense every hour for a week while meditating under starlight. Others instructed practitioners to avoid anger for 3 days before starting, lest the potion inherit their heat. Emotions were ingredients too. It's deeply poetic, really. You don't just make an elixir. You harmonize with one. You align your breath, your timing, your state of mind. A bad mood can spoil the mix. So can bad weather. So can, presumably, a clumsy apprentice sneezing into the sulfur bowl. Your alchemist now begins grinding the green powder in a shallow stone mortar. His motion slow, circular, consistent. He glances again at the chart, then nods. This finally is the right moment. As he sprinkles the orchid into the mix, you hear a soft chime in the distance, maybe a bell, maybe wind brushing past a hanging charm. Either way, it's as though the room has agreed to cooperate. He lights a flame, adds the gold flakes, and begins heating the mixture in a thin clay vessel. The smell that rises is delicate, fresh, earthy, just a hint of cinnamon. You lean in, exhale, and let your eyes close for a moment. It all makes sense now, doesn't it? The elaborate rituals, the star watching, the poetic instructions. This wasn't about precision in the modern sense, it was about presence, being awake to the world, attuned to its quirks and whispers, creating, not against the universe, but with it. There's a peace in that approach, a rhythm, and as the potion simmers, stars twinkling gently beyond the paper window, you feel yourself slipping into it, one breath at a time. The clay vessel simmers softly, its tiny bubbles catching firelight, like lazy stars rising from a sleepy constellation. Your alchemist barely moves now, content to observe. He doesn't stir, doesn't poke. He just listens, as if the potion itself were whispering a bedtime story about balance, decay, and maybe the time someone blew the eyebrows off a royal guard. You take a deep breath. Something smells nutty, smoky, a little sweet. It's difficult to name. The kind of smell you remember from dreams but can never quite explain. It reminds you of something long ago, or maybe something that never happened at all. Just as you settle deeper into the room's warmth, a sharp clatter shatters the calm. A small clay flask has rolled off a side table, splashing a bit of oil on the floor. No explosion, thankfully, but the alchemist moves swiftly, muttering something between a prayer and a scolding as he retrieves it, and you get a glimpse of something even more chaotic than fire. An alchemical apprentice. This particular assistant is small, barefoot, and wearing robes 2 sizes too long. He peers around the corner with a mixture of fear Curiosity and the kind of guilty expression that says, I definitely stirred something I wasn't supposed to. You're witnessing the quiet panic of a soul who has just added one too many spoonfuls of something, labeled volatile when excited. Apprentices, of course, were vital to the alchemical process, but also one of its greatest hazards. You imagine being 17, underfed, underslept, and tasked with carrying molten mercury between two earthenware jars without tipping, dripping, or sneezing. It was not a job for the easily distracted, and yet countless young hopefuls took it on, believing, just like their masters, that they might one day discover the secret to eternal life, or at least keep all their limbs in the process. Your alchemist sighs and waves the boy in. The apprentice scuttles forward, arms full of bundled scrolls and something in a cup that is, mercifully, not glowing. He deposits the items quickly, bows, and retreats with the grace of someone who knows every floorboard, that creaks in every jar that's ready to blow. You shake your head, already imagining the next few minutes, because as every ancient Chinese alchemist knew, the secret ingredient is panic. Historians have uncovered more than one set of lab notes where things took a sharp left turn due to a coughing fit, a surprise sneeze, or in one famous case, a misplaced cricket. Chaos wasn't an if, it was a when. One preserved Tang Dynasty scroll even includes marginalia that reads, Assistant dropped the ladle again. I fear for our ceiling. And yet these apprentices were essential. They fetched water from sacred springs, prepared herbs at dawn, cleaned flasks, copied scrolls, and ran errands to temples to collect dragon bones, which were usually old animal fossils, but it's the thought that counts. Some even stayed with their masters for decades, eventually inheriting the title and the tools, as well as the habit of flinching whenever anything fizzed unexpectedly. You turn your attention back to the central cauldron, where the alchemist has now begun a delicate transfer. He pours the cooled mixture into a narrow-necked flask using a bent reed as a funnel. The apprentice leans forward, eyes wide. You can tell he's holding his breath. So are you. The stream of liquid curls like silk, not a drop spills. When it's done, the alchemist seals the flask with wax and gently places it into a sand-filled box to cool. He pats the lid like a sleeping cat. Disaster avoided for now. Of course, not every experiment ended so neatly. Some labs were buried under collapsed ceilings. Others became community legends. The house where sparks fly during full moons, or the hut that hums when it rains. Entire villages whispered about nearby alchemists, viewing them with awe and mild suspicion, like weather patterns that occasionally shouted. But still, people brought their sick to be healed, their hopes to be bottled, their money, their faith, their curiosity, despite the smoke, despite the accidents. Because here's the truth. The pursuit of alchemy was never tidy. It was messy, literal and metaphorical, but it carried within it the deep human desire to transform the ordinary into something sacred, to turn leaves into medicine, stones into energy, mortality into maybe not today. You lean back again, observing the alchemist and his young assistant. They move with the rhythm of repetition, clean. Prep, check the stars, check the seals. It's almost a dance. A sleepy one. One that's been performed by thousands of hands across centuries. In huts, temples, and hidden grottos. In one corner of the room sits a faded wood plaque with just 3 brushstroke characters. Stillness, refine heart. You suspect it's less of a slogan and more of a survival tip. And so, as the apprentice stirs a pot that probably won't explode, and the alchemist traces characters on a scroll with fingers stained red from cinnabar, you feel yourself drawn into that same rhythm. A rhythm that accepts chaos as part of the path. A rhythm where mistakes aren't failures, just strange turns in a long, smoky road. You breathe it in, ash, resin, the faintest trace of peach blossom, and let it settle. Because here in this strange, glowing lab, even panic has its place. The apprentice has been sent to sweep out the back corridor. Part discipline, part safety protocol, and perhaps a little bit of, please stop knocking things over. Meanwhile, your alchemist, with all the serenity of someone who has absolutely accepted that explosions are part of the spiritual journey, begins preparing for his next project. And this one smells like destiny, or sulfur. He retrieves 3 small vials from a box marked only with the character Huo Fire. Each is stoppered with beeswax and wrapped in cloth. He sets them gently beside a scroll rolled so tightly that the paper edges have curled into a perfect spiral. You recognize the way he handles it. Reverence, precision, and just a touch of unease. Because what's coming next is the slow burn, origin of something that changed the world. The moment when Taoist alchemy accidentally invented gunpowder. Yep, while trying to live forever. They accidentally gave humanity a way to end things a bit faster. You wouldn't guess it from the sleepy rhythm of the lab. But somewhere in the 9th century, Chinese alchemists, working with familiar substances like saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, discovered that when mixed in the wrong proportions, their immortality pill would just erupt violently, spectacularly, and eventually profitably. But back then, it was just another volatile batch. In fact, early texts described the results in poetic terms like smoke that dances angrily and flames that chase the soul. One unfortunate alchemist, whose name is lost to history but not to legend, wrote that the mixture roared like 10,000 horses and burned even the water. You lean over the alchemist's shoulder now as he mixes, a tiny amount of gray powder in a shallow dish, the movement slow and deliberate. No chanting, no cosmic alignments this time, just careful chemistry before chemistry had a name. At this point in history, the recipe wasn't being used for weapons, not yet. These early experiments were still trying to coax transformation, not destruction. The idea was that such a potent reaction could symbolize spiritual rebirth, a flash of energy so complete it left only purified essence behind. You're starting to notice a theme. If something exploded, the ancient alchemists tended to describe it with a straight face and a philosophical shrug. Historians still debate whether the initial gunpowder experiments were recorded as failures or surprises. Some scrolls imply they were abandoned as too strong to contain spirit. Others were cautiously explored as possible tools for banishing demons, especially when combined with ritual firecrackers and specific incantations. You see, it wasn't a big leap from exploding dust to let's use this on ghost problems. And so, the early version of gunpowder was used in feng huo qi, devices designed to emit loud noises and bright flashes during spiritual ceremonies. Think of it as holy pyrotechnics sanctioned by monks, but with a very real risk of singeing your eyebrows off. The flask your alchemist now holds contains a faintly yellow grainy substance. He pours a pinch into a bronze dish and sets it beside a shallow stone brazier. No flame yet, just observation. You get the sense that even he doesn't fully trust what he's made. Eventually, these discoveries traveled from temples to armies. Records from the Song dynasty describe fire arrows, bamboo tubes filled with this magic dust and launched during siege warfare. Later came thunder crash bombs on flying fire lances, and other inventions that sound suspiciously like someone trying to weaponize a sneeze. But in these early days, it was still cloaked in sacred vocabulary. Alchemists didn't say, "I made something explode." They said, "I released the binding of heaven's breath," which, let's be honest, sounds way cooler. You look back at the scroll unrolled now. It reveals a chart of proportions. 1 part saltpeter, 1 part sulfur, a hint of honey for stickiness, and something scrawled hastily in the margin that could either be wait 3 breaths or pray it. Doesn't ignite too fast. The alchemist lights the smallest of flames, a thread of fire along a reed taper. He lowers it slowly, respectfully, toward the edge of the mixture. Not close enough to spark it, just close enough to honor it. The flame dances, but the powder does not. Not this time. Instead, a soft puff of smoke rises, smelling faintly of eggs, ash, and old parchment. The alchemist nods. He wasn't testing for reaction. He was testing restraint, the ability to make something powerful and not use it, to honor the potential without rushing to wield it. And that's what makes this whole thing even more fascinating. The earliest users of gunpowder weren't generals. They were seekers, people trying to find the path to immortality, and stumbling spectacularly into combustion. You'd think they'd be disappointed, but no. Some saw it as a sign that even in failure the universe was speaking. And what was it saying? Perhaps be careful what you mix while fasting. Or maybe, every fire begins with wonder. You settle into the warmth of the lab again. The dangerous mixture has been sealed away, labeled in calm brushstrokes and tucked back into the firebox. The alchemist pours himself a cup of tea, made from goji berries and something unidentifiable but pleasantly floral. The apprentice returns, this time with a broom and a helmet. Smart kid. They share a glance, serious but not fearful, because this is the rhythm of discovery. A little chaos, a lot of patience, and the eternal hope that this batch, this spark, this moment might just be the one that reveals the secret of it all. The steam from the goji berry tea drifts lazily through the room, blending with the smoky remains of earlier concoctions and the faint, lingering trace of fire-laced powder. The alchemist takes a small sip, closes his eyes, and leans back, calm as ever. But you catch it, that subtle flicker in his expression, a shadow of concern, a moment of hesitation. You follow his gaze to a narrow shelf, high and half hidden behind a hanging scroll. On it sit 3 ceramic jars, each painted with the imperial dragon in faded cobalt. Unlike the others in the lab, these are not dusty. These are kept clean, revered, or feared. He rises slowly and, with hands that move just a little more carefully than usual, retrieves the jar at the center. He places it in front of you, unties the red string around its neck, and removes the lid. The smell hits immediately, sharp, mineral, sweet, and wrong. Not toxic like mercury, not earthy like powdered jade. This is richer, heavier. You glance into the jar and see what looks like crushed gemstones mixed with ash, and at the center a small sphere wrapped in gold leaf. This is an imperial elixir, and this is the part of history where you start wondering why so many emperors died so mysteriously. Throughout Chinese history, emperors from multiple dynasties were deeply invested in the promise of alchemy. They weren't just patrons, they were participants. They funded labs, commissioned custom elixirs, sent ships across oceans looking for mystical ingredients, and, tragically often, drank exactly what they were told not to. One of the most infamous examples? Emperor Wu of Jin. Believing in a Taoist formula said to grant immortality, he regularly consumed a cinnabar-based tonic, despite repeated symptoms of mercury poisoning, headaches, tremors, gradual madness. But to him, these were not red flags. They were signs the elixir was working. Historians still argue whether he was being manipulated, misinformed, or simply delusional. But one thing is certain, he wasn't alone. Emperor after emperor sought the perfect blend. Some lasted a few years, others only months. You think of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, who was so obsessed with avoiding death that he drank mercury in the form of powdered cinnabar, believing it to be divine. He also sent ships to find the islands of the immortals, crewed by children and magicians. None returned. Instead, his tomb, allegedly surrounded by rivers of mercury, became one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of the ancient world. Scientists still debate how much mercury lies beneath that hill near Xi'an, and whether the levels are as toxic as ancient texts suggest. But it wasn't just Qin Shi Huang. During the Tang Dynasty, Emperor Xianzong died, suddenly after ingesting a golden elixir said to calm the wind within. His doctors noted he danced without rhythm and spoke to no one for 3 days. Another Emperor Muzong lasted barely 2 years before succumbing to a similar tonic. You peer closer into the jar. The gold-leafed ball gleams faintly in the firelight. It's likely made of realgar, orpiment, or crushed pearls, any of which might dazzle in the mouth and doom the liver. Still, there was a logic to it all. Gold doesn't tarnish. Mercury flows endlessly. Cinnabar glows with a rich crimson hue. To an emperor seeking permanence, these materials must have seemed perfect, elegant, eternal, immune to decay. But the body, blessed, is not made for swallowing beauty. The alchemist before you does not offer the elixir to drink. He merely uncaps it, observes, he knows. He has read the scrolls, tended the fires, and perhaps most painfully, witnessed the fallout. He reseals the jar gently, the red string wound tight, and places it back on the high shelf. It's a sobering moment. For all the poetic rituals and sacred symbols, alchemy had its shadows. It seduced the powerful. It promised too much. And it did so with elegance and smoke. And yet, oddly, many practitioners didn't abandon it after these deaths. Instead, they doubled down, rewriting formulas, adjusting dosages, blaming court chefs for improper mixing. Some even claimed that a failed elixir didn't cause death. It simply transferred the emperor to a subtler realm. It's an impressive excuse. You mentally file it under things to say if your soup causes a spiritual episode. In truth, part of the problem may have been faith. The emperors wanted it to work, needed it. The fear of death is powerful, and when you're told that transformation is just one sip away, you might ignore the twitch in your eye or the fact that your teeth are turning black. You wonder if any of them hesitated, held the elixir to their lips and paused. Did they feel the weight of centuries behind the promise? The pressure of 1,000 scrolls telling them this would elevate their soul? Or did they just drink and hope? Back in the lab, the alchemist has returned to a simpler task. He's grinding lotus seeds into powder, a formula known not for immortality but for dreamless sleep. A mild tonic, non-toxic, gentle, you breathe easier. Maybe that's the lesson he's offering now. Alchemy can chase stars, yes, but sometimes the best thing it can offer is rest. Stillness, a quiet mind, and maybe, just maybe, a night without the weight of ambition. He pours the lotus powder into a small cup, stirs it with warm water, and hands it to the apprentice, who sips gratefully. No gold, no glory, just peace, and somehow that feels like the most powerful potion of all. The apprentice, now safely dosed with the lotus tonic, curls up in a corner of the lab on a woven mat that has definitely seen better decades. Within moments, his breathing slows. One hand twitches reflexively, perhaps dreaming of scrolls that copy themselves or cauldrons that don't leak. You smile softly. Not every alchemical result needs to be dramatic. Sometimes sleep is the most underrated transformation of all. But your alchemist host isn't done. Not quite. Tonight's final task isn't about humans. It's about horses. Yes, you heard that right. Because in the annals of ancient Chinese alchemy, nestled between chapters on soul refinement and thunder elixirs, there's a curious detour. Tonics and potions created specifically for animals. And not just any animals, horses, oxen, birds, and in one delightfully bewildering case, a particularly temperamental goat. You ease onto a nearby cushion as the alchemist retrieves a ceramic jar with a horse-shaped lid. It's adorable, and also kind of ominous. Painted on its side are scenes of riders galloping through clouds, their horses glowing gold and trailing ribbons of mist. Subtle, it is not. Inside is a chalky powder with green and beige streaks. It smells faintly of licorice hay and something like mossy stone. This, you realize, is a stamina tonic. Designed not for emperors or monks, but for cavalry mounts. Ancient texts describe all sorts of these concoctions. Some meant to increase speed, others to cool the internal wind of a horse, still others to boost fur sheen. There were even brews for helping war horses recover from battle wounds. Using ingredients like powdered turtle shell, cinnamon bark, and deer antler. You imagine the recipe testing phase. A calm Taoist in flowing robes, standing beside a very confused horse, who's just been fed something that smells like roasted mushrooms and lightning. Historians still argue whether these animal-targeted elixirs were widely effective or more aspirational in nature. One surviving Song dynasty scroll confidently states that a certain mixture will allow the horse to gallop for 3 days without tiring, and also make the hooves sing like jade bells. Charming, unverified. Still, it wasn't all fanciful poetry. Some of these treatments had real medicinal value. Antiseptics, digestives, balms. Alchemists, being observers of nature, learned quickly which herbs helped a tired ox breathe easier or soothed a warhound's shaking limbs. Your alchemist has now ladled a small portion of the mixture into a bowl of warm water. He stirs with a reed, lets it settle, and sets it aside near the back door, presumably where a stable servant might collect it before dawn. There's something beautiful about the gesture, thoughtful, quiet, equal, part science and kindness. And it wasn't just horses. Records show elixirs meant for falcons, prized by the aristocracy for hunting. These winged hunters were given tonics to sharpen eyesight and reduce aggression, recipes that often included crushed pearl, chrysanthemum flower, and essence of clear dawn. The last one likely a poetic way of saying rainwater collected before sunrise. Then there were the more absurd treatments. One scroll lists a potion for quieting a rooster's boastful crow, which involved fermented millet, bamboo ash, and silence. Another describes an ox salve intended to align the horns with heavenly virtue. Results not guaranteed. The point is, alchemy's reach extended to every corner of life. Not just the heavens and emperors, not just the monks chasing smoke, but the animals who carried burdens, ferried messengers, pulled plows, and occasionally wore ceremonial armor into battle. You glance over to the apprentice, now sound asleep, still gripping a scroll in one hand like a pillow of knowledge. The alchemist checks on him, tucks a corner of his robe over his feet, then returns to his work. It strikes you just how human all of this is. All the ambition, the misfires, the hope wrapped in ritual. The belief that if you grind the right root, stir at the right time, and whisper the right phrase, you might ease pain, even for a creature that can't say thank you. Alchemy wasn't just about gods and immortals. It was about care, about tending, about a belief that everything, be it emperor or ox, deserves attention, deserves peace, deserves the chance to shine a little brighter. And sometimes that effort looked like a golden elixir. Other times, just a bowl of mossy tonic by the door. You stretch, yawn, and lean against the warm wall, the scent of hay and herbal powder wrapping around you like a weighted blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a horse nickers softly, as if to say, thanks, I guess, and maybe that's enough. You stay seated against the warm wall, half lulled by the scent of herbs and distant hoofbeats. The alchemist has dimmed most of the lamps now. Only the fire remains, a single steady glow casting long, sleepy shadows across the scroll-lined shelves. It's late or early. Time, like so much else in this place, seems to drift in circles. But the alchemist doesn't rest. Not yet. He returns to his workbench with a fresh sheet of paper, a brush, and a jar of ink so thick it looks like liquid obsidian. This is no casual note-taking. You can feel the weight in the air, the solemnity. This is record-keeping not for today but for the future, a log of what worked, what didn't, and what caught fire unexpectedly. You lean closer and see the title he paints at the top of the page. Elixir Attempt 97 Plum Blossom Night. You smile. Even in failure, the naming is poetic, because what you're witnessing is not just chemistry. It's the inner workings of an ancient cottage industry, an economy built not on factories or coin, but on mystery, reputation, and incense-thick promises. You see, by the late Tang and into the Song dynasty, alchemy wasn't limited to temples and imperial courts anymore. It had gone freelance. Entire neighborhoods, particularly in southern China, became known for private alchemical workshops. Families passed down recipes like heirlooms. There were rivalries, apprentices poached, and scrolls smuggled between districts. A single rare ingredient, say, a beetle that only emerged during red moonlight, could make or break a formula's market value. And yes, people paid. Oh, they paid. Wealthy merchants and retired officials would send messengers, carrying heavy coin and polite letters requesting a discreet course of elixirs to improve one's internal harmony and perhaps delay certain mortal conditions. Translation: please help me live longer without growing scales. You imagine these clients waiting nervously at home, sipping lotus tea while wondering if that bubbling paste from last week was supposed to make their toenails glow in the dark. Alchemical practitioners operated out of modest compounds, some no bigger than cottages, others elaborate, multi-roomed complexes with separate chambers for mixing. Drying, grinding, and meditation. The more successful ones even had customer rooms, tiny salons with cushions, zither music, and softly rattling wind chimes. A spa if the spa sometimes spontaneously combusted. Historians still argue whether these operations were regulated or allowed to bloom like particularly flammable mushrooms, but many left behind paper trails, receipts, ingredient lists, and cautionary notes like, never combine gold leaf with nightshade root on humid days. Back at the table, the alchemist finishes his header and begins listing today's attempts. His brushwork is patient and unhurried. He writes not just what he did, but how it felt. The color of the mixture, the sound it made when it bubbled, the behavior of the flame, notes that would be meaningless to anyone else but to another alchemist, as precious as a compass. You glance around the lab and realize how many of these entries must be stored here. Rolled scrolls bound in silk, tucked into carved cubbies, each one a snapshot of a moment, a failure, a flicker of possibility. Some successful, perhaps, others cautionary tales, and not all stories stayed within these walls. Word traveled fast in this smoky little world. Whisper campaigns about whose potion had caused a local magistrate to sleep for 3 days, or worse, to compose a full-length opera entirely in falsetto. Reputation mattered, and so did discretion. The best alchemists weren't just skilled, they were trustworthy. They didn't gossip. They didn't copy formulas, at least not openly. And if something exploded, they blamed the humidity, or mercury being in the wrong trigram. Of course, some took advantage. You'd get traveling peddler alchemists, rolling into towns with grand promises, flashy robes, and tonics so sweet they tasted like spiced plums but cured absolutely nothing. These scammers were quickly found out, usually when someone's eyebrows went missing, or their spleen began to hum. One infamous figure, known only as Master Shu of the Amber Pavilion, claimed to have created an elixir that granted temporary invisibility. He became incredibly rich selling it to high-ranking officials who vanished in public gardens, though mostly because they were hiding behind hedges waiting for it to kick in. Eventually, Master Shu disappeared himself. Whether into legend or exile remains unclear, but back in the lab, your host remains grounded. No flashy claims, no gilded jars, just careful notes, honest documentation, and a steady hand. He reaches for a seal carved from smoky quartz and presses it into the bottom of the scroll, a symbol of completion, finality, responsibility. You realize then that this cottage industry wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on quiet obsession. People who woke up thinking about ratios, who dreamed in smoke rings, who tested the impossible over and over again, knowing they might fail every time, but also knowing that the next batch might just flicker with something extraordinary. Not gold, not eternity, just understanding. The alchemist blows gently on the ink to dry it, rolls the scroll with reverence, places it on a shelf beside dozens more, like tucking a child into bed. Then he sits down, closes his eyes, and breathes in the silence. And so do you. The room feels even quieter now. Not the silence of nothingness, but the full-bodied hush that follows when every ember, scroll, and thought has finally settled. The apprentice sleeps. The fire hums. The air holds the soft musk of ink, ash, and drying herbs. You'd think there's nothing left to uncover, but there is always one last riddle, one final pile of soot to sift through. And tonight it comes from the broken edge of history, the part where the fires died down and the ruins remained. The alchemist rises, slow and stiff. He crosses the room and opens a small chest made of dark lacquered wood, its hinges creaking like an old door telling a secret. From inside, he pulls out a few warped shards of porcelain, a strip of scorched silk, and what looks like a half-melted glass bead the color of dusk. He lays them out gently on the table. These are fragments, relics of failed batches, shattered retorts, bits of burned paper that survived just enough to hint at what had once been. And as he runs a finger across their edges, you realize this too is part of the work. The preservation of loss, because for every elixir that simmered just right, there were dozens that burst, fizzled, or turned to dust, Archaeologists have uncovered entire sites once dedicated to alchemical study, many reduced to nothing more than blackened stones, collapsed walls, and vessels fused into a single mass by unplanned combustion. One dig outside Loyang revealed a workshop where the stone floor had melted in one corner, warped into ripples like liquid stone. They found ash, a cracked crucible, and a scroll box charred beyond saving, but also nestled among the ruins a single intact pestle carved with a phoenix. It's unclear what happened. Some theorize a final experiment gone wrong. Others believe the lab was sabotaged by rivals, or swept away in a fire caused by a nearby lightning strike. Historians still argue whether it was a tragic accident or a dramatic exit by a practitioner who knew too much. What they do agree on, the site was layered. Ash on ash, layers of failure compacted into fossilized ambition. The alchemist places the scorched bead on a cloth square. Even now it shimmers faintly. It might have been part of a decorative charm meant to hang over the doorway, or a failed attempt at crystallizing cinnabar. No one knows. And that's the point. So much of alchemy's legacy lives in uncertainty. The ingredients were vague, the measurements poetic. A breath's worth of powder, enough to fit on a tiger's whisker. Stir until the air shifts, and the goals, even more elusive. To purify the soul, to reshape matter, to touch the divine. No surprise then that so much remains unclear. One particularly enigmatic scroll, known as the Furnace Codex, describes an elixir made only when the mountain of stillness exhales silver fog and the foxes run backward. A lovely image, possibly a weather pattern, possibly nonsense. But alchemists copied it carefully for generations, because whether literal or symbolic, it carried meaning, and meaning matters. You run your fingers along the porcelain shard. A blue design is still visible, waves maybe, or clouds. The brushwork is rushed but elegant. It feels like the last stroke someone made before the room filled with smoke. Back in the modern world, scholars continue to catalog these pieces, trying to decode smudged recipes, translate archaic character variants, recreate compounds using simulation software. But there's a quiet understanding. Now, many of these mysteries won't be solved. Some combinations died with their makers. Some scrolls burned before being shared. Others were hidden deliberately, buried beneath temples, sealed in jars, offered to rivers as part of final rites. Your alchemist begins returning the fragments to their chest one by one, not with sadness but with respect, as if each piece still carries its own hum, its own message. He wraps the silk tightly, refastens the lid, and sets it back on its shelf beside the living scrolls, the active recipes, the hopeful beginnings. Because in alchemy, failure isn't an ending. It's a chapter, a record, a necessary burn on the path to whatever glows next. You glance at the shelves, the fading firelight catching on copper jars and glass vials. Each one contains a story, some loud, some quiet, some barely begun. And you realize the legacy of these ancient alchemists isn't just in what they created. It's in what they attempted, what they risked, what they were willing to watch collapse in the hope that something new might rise from the soot. So tonight, as your breath slows and your eyes begin to drift, let your thoughts scatter like ash across parchment. Let them settle between the cracks. Let them shimmer softly beside every failed spark and every whispered success. Because even the ruins remember. The fire is almost out now. Just a few patient embers remain, pulsing like sleepy stars at the bottom of the brazier. The alchemist has settled beside them, legs folded, back straight despite the hour. He does not speak. He does not need to. His hands rest on his knees, still stained faintly with cinnabar and soot. And in this final stretch of your journey, we return to the beginning, to the dream that lit all those fires in the first place. Gold. Not just gold as a metal, but gold as a metaphor, a promise. The warm color of the sun captured in solid form. The one substance that never tarnishes, never rusts, never bends to time. You think back through every concoction, every bubbling pot, every flash of misguided optimism. At the core of nearly every alchemical pursuit, was the notion that base matter could be transformed into something pure, something eternal. Alchemy wasn't just trying to make gold from stone. It was trying to make meaning from mortality. And that meant enduring centuries of strange ingredients, frustrated emperors, philosophical disasters, and yes, explosions. You now understand why so many practitioners stayed with it despite the setbacks. Why they kept refining, kept grinding herbs in the cold dawn, kept copying brittle scrolls until their fingers cracked. Because gold was the goal, but transformation was the point. You look around the lab for the last time. The shelves are lined with possibility, with hope, with dozens of recipes, many of which will never be tested again. Maybe they failed once. Maybe they just needed the right moment. Or maybe they were never about ingredients at all, but about the devotion with which they were prepared. And that's the truth of Chinese alchemy. Not a catalog of dangerous chemistry experiments, but a record of yearning. 1,000 hands, 1,000 hearts, chasing the same flicker in the dark. What if we could change? What if we could stay? What if we could shine? The alchemist reaches into a wooden drawer and pulls out one last scroll. It's thinner than the others, simpler. He unrolls it just enough for you to read the first few characters. It says, "That which cannot be found by fire." You smile. That feels right. Not everything can be boiled, or brewed, or bound in beeswax. Some things, like wisdom, kindness, stillness, can only be arrived at quietly, after everything else has burned away. So as he gently ties the scroll closed again and returns it to its place, you feel a softness settle over the room. No more experiments tonight. No more potions. No more chasing the uncatchable. Just warmth. Just silence. Just sleep. And now the fire has faded. The scrolls rest in their cubbies. The jars are sealed. The powder's tucked away. The apprentice snores gently in the corner, still curled like a question mark around his last dream. The alchemist has closed his eyes. Maybe he's meditating. Maybe he's remembering. Or maybe at long last even he has surrendered to the quiet. You feel it too, that stillness creeping in through the cracks, wrapping around your breath, stretching gently through your limbs. You've wandered through centuries of smoke and longing. You've seen the flickers, the sparks, the brief shimmers of hope buried under stone and soot. And you've understood that even the failed formulas were part of the story. They were all steps, all notes in a song with no end. And maybe you've changed a little too. Maybe tonight, you've become just a bit more patient with the world's mysteries, with your own imperfections, with the slow, strange rhythm of becoming. So let the room grow darker now. Let the jars vanish into shadow. Let the last ember wink out like a tired eye. You are safe here. You are still. You are enough. Let the silence hold you. Let the breath deepen. Let the alchemists sleep. And let the gold within you glow. Ever so softly, ever so quietly. Good night, sweet dreams.